Streaming platforms are systematically pushing music toward sounds that don't disturb you. Not by censoring artists, not by deleting frequencies, but by the way their recommendation systems are designed. By the end of this video, you'll understand why so much modern music feels emotionally empty and what 80s electronic music understood about sound that we've slowly unlearned. Your favorite track is disappearing, not because it isn't good, but because it isn't harmless enough for the algorithm. This isn't a theory, it's how engagement-driven algorithms work. Research on recommendation systems shows that certain kinds of content become invisible when they create friction. Songs that contain dissonance, unstable harmony, or aggressive low-frequency energy, what we call dark music, tend to perform poorly in terms of skips and completion rate. When that happens, the system quietly stops recommending them. This isn't about taste or quality music versus uninspired music. It's about risk management. Platforms optimize for one thing above all others: uninterrupted consumption. To an algorithm, every skip is treated as a failure, and every interruption is a signal that something went wrong. This constant pressure to avoid risk creates a statistical phenomenon known as hubness bias. It sounds academic, but the mechanics are brutally simple. The system begins to favor tracks that sit at the mathematical center of what is generally tolerated. These become the hubs: safe, low-friction songs that get recommended thousands of times simply because they don't provoke a reaction. Conversely, everything that falls outside that safe cluster becomes an anti-hub. It's flagged as risky and quietly removed from the system's field of view. The algorithm doesn't gamble on your curiosity, it bets on your inertia. From a data perspective, attention is high risk. When a track forces you to wake up and actually listen, it breaks your passive flow. In that moment of imposed attention, you are forced to make a conscious choice. And for the system, any conscious choice is a window for an exit. The algorithm prefers the listener who consumes 50 harmless tracks in a trance over the one who is deeply moved by one powerful song and then decides to put the phone down. This isn't speculation. Recent EU transparency requirements, particularly those introduced under the Digital Services Act, confirmed what independent researchers had already documented. Recommendation systems are optimized for session continuity and completion rates, not artistic depth. So, why does dark music specifically trigger this risk? Because your amygdala, the part of your brain involved in emotional salience, fear, and intensity, responds strongly to dissonance and low-frequency energy, and that makes it almost always fall into the anti-hub category. Not because the system recognizes dissonance as a concept, but because the statistical patterns associated with it correlate with higher skip rates. Sounds below roughly 200 Hz don't remain confined to the auditory system. They are perceived through vibration, pressure, and resonance in the body. This creates a visceral response, unease, introspection, intensity. To be very precise, low frequencies don't hit the amygdala directly. The brain doesn't work that way. But auditory neuroscience shows that emotionally salient sounds, especially those involving dissonance, unpredictability, and physical intensity, tend to activate the amygdala earlier and more strongly during perception. Music with a deep, organized structure can act as a regulatory tool. It can move the brain from a state of panic and noise to a state of presence and resonance. From a human perspective, this is a form of healing. From an algorithm perspective, it's a malfunction. If you're present and focused, you're no longer a passive, suggestible target. Conversely, human hearing is most sensitive between 2 and 5 kHz. This is exactly where speech lives, and it's also where notifications, alerts, and advertisements sit comfortably. When music stays in that clean range, it coexists perfectly with everything else happening on your screen. As we already said, strong low-frequency content demands a physical presence that is bad for multitasking. And if it's bad for multitasking, it's bad for the platform's metrics.
Wait, this doesn't make sense. If I'm in this trance you're talking about, I'm not really paying attention to the ads either. Wouldn't it be better to have a listener who stays less time, but is actually attentive, instead of someone who stays longer while being distracted?
That sounds reasonable, and it's exactly how a human would think about advertising. But that's not how digital advertising works anymore. Platforms are not selling your focused attention. They're selling exposure. Advertisers don't pay for you to carefully evaluate an ad in that moment. They pay for impressions, frequency, and time spent. They pay to be present, not to be consciously listened to. In fact, conscious attention is often a problem, because when you're attentive, you judge, you filter, you get annoyed, and you skip. A distracted listener doesn't do any of that. They don't resist, they don't interrupt the flow, they don't leave. Advertising today works through repetition and familiarity, not persuasion in real time. The brand doesn't need to convince you now, it just needs to be there while you're not pushing back. And that's another reason why, from the platform's point of view, 10 minutes of passive exposure is far more valuable than 2 minutes of critical attention. Modern chill playlists are designed to keep your brain quiet. They are meant to coexist with emails, shopping carts, and notifications, making them perfect for background listening over long periods of time. Music stops being content and becomes an environment, a polite background for your consumption. Think about the difference between a Depeche Mode track from around 1986 and the modern chill beats playlist. Depeche Mode's productions relied heavily on analog synthesis and prominent low-frequency content, creating a physical sense of tension that extends beyond purely auditory perception. Their harmonic choices often avoid full resolution, which contributes to a persistent feeling of unease and makes the music harder to treat as passive background sound. In the 1980s, music was mixed for physical spaces, clubs, cars, and home systems with actual air-moving speakers. Producers assumed the bass would be felt, not just heard. Analog equipment reinforced this. Tape and vinyl imposed physical constraints that added weight, texture, and what we now call mud. But that mud was actually harmonic density. Today's medium is a smartphone speaker, and the medium shapes the art. This is where the cycle of economic survival begins. Producers know that most listening happens on devices physically incapable of reproducing deep sub-bass. Smartphones, laptops, cheap earbuds. This isn't a moral failure on their part, it's adaptation. To avoid being flagged as muddy or unpleasant by the system, they trimmed the low end. They prioritized clarity over physicality, just to survive the statistical cut.
Stop right there. Spotify gives me an EQ. I can just boost the bass myself.
Yeah, right. Don't be fooled, my friend. That's like being given a box of crayons to draw on a prison wall. An EQ is a post-processing band-aid. It doesn't change the fact that the recommendation engine, the gatekeeper, has already penalized the track at the source. The algorithm doesn't listen to your EQ, it listens to the raw data and skip rates of the masses. If, when you make music, you deliberately reintroduce those low-frequency elements by pushing the sub-bass until it slightly distorts, According to modern clean production standards, that's often labeled as a mistake. It's called muddy or unprofessional. But according to your nervous system, it's not a mistake, it's a signal. However, the algorithm doesn't care about the soul of the track. It only sees that clean sound keeps you in a passive trance, while physical sound makes you stop and look away from the feed. The loss here isn't technical, it's cultural. When music loses its capacity to disturb, challenge, or demand physical presence, it stops being art and becomes furniture. It turns into harmless background noise for productivity. That's not an accident, it's optimization. And since the primary goal of streaming platforms is to generate revenue, from their perspective, this is the smartest outcome possible. So, no, it's not a conspiracy, it's not an attempt to make us all much dumber, it's simply a matter of money. AI-generated music is not reversing this trend, it's accelerating it. Generative AI models are trained on existing catalogs. But those catalogs have already been filtered by years of engagement-based systems. The AI isn't learning music, it's learning what performed well on Spotify. So the bias compounds. The machine is studying a version of art that has already been sterilized. Within a few years, dissonance and low-frequency tension may become statistically abnormal. Not artistically, statistically. The system learns that anything outside the dominant safe pattern is a technical error to be corrected. And this is how emotional depth gets referred as a flow. No one needs to plan this. The system teaches itself to be boring. Every time technology optimizes art for convenience, the rough edges move underground. And yet, consider this. Punk survived radio. Hip-hop survived censorship. So, dark music will survive algorithms. Only it will not be visible by default. You will have to go looking for it. Once you notice the clean filter being applied to your world, you start hearing it everywhere. And the moment you hear it, the algorithm loses its power over you. The question isn't what the system wants to play for you. The question is, are you still brave enough to listen to something that disturbs your peace?